Well, good evening, everyone. It's 6:30. We'll start the meeting. This is a special meeting of the Development Control Committee on the 7th of April. We are not expecting a fire alarm, and so if you hear something that sounds like a fire alarm, we'll assume it is one, and we leave the chamber through and follow the fire exit signs. And if you have been signed into the building, please then wait outside at the edge of the Memorial Park so that we can make sure everyone has left the building. If you disappear, we'll put people at risk searching for you when you're nowhere to be found. To remind you that the meeting is being webcast. That means from the point of view of public speakers, if you come forward to speak, you will appear on the webcast. I have apologies for absence from Mrs. Taylor. Not aware of any other apologies for absence. Are there any substitutions? No, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Thank you. There are no urgent items or announcements. With your agreement, I propose that we take the minutes of the last meeting at our normal meeting on Wednesday rather than this evening. Does everyone agree to that? Thank you. We have no referrals from other committees or the Council. We have no issues referred by the Cabinet. And we move on to the purpose of the meeting this evening, which is the update on the state of play at the Razors Farm appeal inquiry. And I just check before we go any further with that I know who is going to speak. I'm expecting to hear from Chinham Parish Council, Bramley and Sherfield Parish Council, Councillor Bierman if he gets here in time. Is there anyone else who's come along expecting to speak? No, thank you. I do hear that Councillor Bierman may be on his way from London, and we'll give him an opportunity to speak if he gets here. And there was some chance that Councillor Still might speak, but I think she's probably not going to get here. So before we move on to the public speaking, I will get the Head of Service to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update members on the preparation of the appeal for non-determination relating to the Razors Farm development. The appeal starting tomorrow in the Council chamber at 10 o'clock. Members will recall that on the 11th of December, the DC Committee resolved to refuse planning permission had they been in a position to do so on 3 principal grounds relating to the sustainability of the development, noise and lack of Section 106 being agreed. Since then, in preparing for the appeal, officers have procured the services of consultants to act on the Council's behalf in the same way that has been done for both the Kennel Farm and the Marnell Park inquiries. Part of that procurement response required confirmation from the consultants that they were able to provide evidence in support of the reasons for refusal based on the information in the application at that time. This has then led to the preparation of proofs of evidence, i.e. the detail of information to be presented at the inquiry, and this has been done in consultation with both officers and Council. Since the production of the proofs of evidence over 4 weeks ago, in accordance with the normal committee appeal timescales, additional information has come to light in regards to mitigation measures in relation to the 2 main reasons for refusal. In relation to the sustainability reason for refusal number 1, this relates to a package of sustainable transport measures, including improvements to bus services and pedestrian facilities that could be secured through a Section 106 agreement. In relation to noise, this has been a change in the appellant's position in accepting the noise levels put forward by the Council's own noise consultant, to the extent that those mitigation could now be secured by way of a condition. Based on that position, the Council's noise and transport consultants are now no longer able to provide evidence in support of the reasons for refusal because of the change in position and change in information. This is related in the recommendation of this report that the Council's position be confirmed as such at the inquiry. This report was publicised at the earliest opportunity following confirmation of the change in information, which was received as late as Thursday last week, the report being published on Friday. The detail of the report is commensurate with what we would normally set out in a DC committee report. However, Both the transport consultant, Steve Parsons, and the noise consultant, Ruben Peckham, are here in case members have any particular questions on the detail of the technical evidence. In terms of an update to what was in your papers already, the appellant has now actually submitted the basis of their costs claim for the inquiry. So that's the basis before this paper is being heard this evening. So they've already submitted a claim against the council stating that they're unreasonable to refuse the planning permission in the first place, or that they would have refused the planning permission had they been in a position to do so. The outcome of this meeting, therefore, may provide the appellant with further reasons to cite in their cost claim against the council. The recommendation is as per paragraph 2.1.
Thank you, Mike. Just before I call upon visiting speakers, I just want to make it clear that the purpose of tonight's meeting is to determine our response to this paper, the recommendations in paragraph 2.1. I've had a number of people been on to me about questions about the process of handling appeals, how information is communicated and so forth. If there are concerns about that, that's a matter we can take up separately and, if necessary, have a workshop or ask PI to investigate the way appeals are handled. But that's not on the agenda tonight. The agenda tonight is purely to look at our position with respect to the recommendations here and with respect to the original reasons for refusal as agreed by this committee. When we heard, we didn't hear the application, but we discussed what we would have thought about the application had we heard the application. The whole thing is strikingly unusual, but just wanted to make that clear. If the representative of Chinham Parish Council would like to come and speak, and if you come and sit at the first table on your left and press the big black button, we sometimes find when we're in the awkward circumstances in this room that none of that works and you've got to find you another seat, but let's hope it does. And if you bring the microphone towards you, that's it. Now try pressing.
Thank you. Yes, my name's David Thornton. I chair the Planning Committee of Chinham Parish Council. We are not, as a council, prepared for this at all because paper A only arrived in our for us at midday on Friday. So your earlier comment about the process needing further discussion is something we intend to take up vigorously. As far as the recommendations are concerned, the one that we in Chinham have been most concerned with was transport, and we don't feel that what is laid out in paper A meets our concerns at all. I mean, it seems to me and my committee that it boils down to a bus service for 5 years. Well, what we wonder happens when the 5 years are up. I think that's something which we would question whether that really made a lot of difference to the problem. And also, we have talk of pedestrian improvements and things like that, which seem to be minor cosmetic. They seem to be minor cosmetic changes rather than the fundamental look at the mass of traffic which is going through Chinham, particularly down Hanmore Road, past a junior school, an infant school, and 2 nurseries. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for being so brief, and we'll just see if members would like to ask you any questions, if you'd stay there for a moment. Members, any questions for the Parish Council? No? Thank you so very much. If we could hear from Bramley and Sherfield, please.
That's on? Yep, okay. Thank you. My name's Tony Durrant. I represent the Bramley Parish Council. I can really only wholly support the comments that have just been made and reiterate the fact that the Parish Council has not really had time to look at this report. However, there's nothing in there that mitigates our concerns, particularly over the transport activity that will inevitably go north through our parish to Bramley Station. further exacerbating the problems we have in Bramley with traffic already. So I can't really add a lot more detail to that. It does concern us also that the capacity for schools and services to support the level of housing in this, what is essentially a very isolated development area. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Do members have any questions? The parish council? No? Thank you very much, sir. We don't have any other speakers. If either of our ward councillors turn up with your agreement, I will invite them to speak as and when they get here. Does everyone agree to that? And strictly out of order. In that case, questions to officers. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. We've already heard from the two parish council representatives that the main interests in terms of certainly transport have been elucidated. I would like to echo their views. I would like to ask the officers, why wasn't the actual transport, the road traffic, examined by the consultants? We were not aware of what the brief was to the two consultants on transport and noise. We weren't aware that that's one of the subjects that they were being addressed anyway. If the ward councillors and the parish councils had been advised about what subjects were being covered, I think a dialogue very early on would have been able to address the issues of transport, not the lack of buses, because that's all to do with sustainability, but also on the noise side. And this was all discussed in committee. It's nothing new. We're not bringing anything new to the table. But we were concerned particularly about the industrial side for air products. But the other one, which was raised by the parish council and by myself, because I've taken the calls from residents who get disturbed by helicopters. All that this particular development does is go closer to the flight path of the helicopters into the Bramley training area. And I would like to know from officers why that hasn't been examined by the noise consultants. Thank you.
The consultants appointed by the council to act on their behalf respond to the reasons for refusal. So the reasons for refusal as stated and as confirmed by the committee. So effectively the reasons for refusal were in relation to the sustainability of the development. They weren't citing the traffic generation as part of that reason. So that's why effectively the brief to the consultant only covers that part. Similarly in relation to noise, the noise reason for refusal relates to the interrelationship between the adjoining business park and the residential development itself. It didn't cover the issues of the helicopters. That doesn't preclude other interested parties raising those points at the inquiry if they so wish, but they're not part of the council's case in terms of defending the reasons for refusal as stated.
I thank you for that, Mike. However, until Friday, we didn't know what the scope was of these two consultants. If we had known that, we would have raised it earlier and not raised it at this very late stage.
Just to clarify, if we turn to Appendix A, or Appendix 1, Paper A, the three reasons for refusal are those that were set out in the minutes of the meeting. And if you look at reason 1, it doesn't actually mention traffic impact on surrounding roads and networks and communities. That isn't one of the reasons for refusal that we agreed and that was minuted. And I've emphasised this in previous committee meetings, that we have to be very careful to make sure that when officers note the reasons for refusal, we are as complete as we can be with what we think are the reasons for refusal. Once the committee has decided the reasons for refusal and they're reflected in the minutes, there's no option to go back and amend them, and it would have been inappropriate for the consultants to be hired to pursue other reasons for refusal which are not actually given in the minutes of the meeting. Now, that may be our fault for not scrutinising the minutes properly. It may be that in the discussion we had, and we'd have to go back to the website, it was made clear that the county were happy with the impact on the surrounding network. And if the county are saying the impact on the surrounding network is not a problem or can be overcome, then that isn't a reason for refusal because they're the experts. So without going back to that webcast, we can't see that. But just to be clear, the officers can't give learned counsel or specialists any brief which is not based upon the written reasons for refusal. And in this case, they do not mention the impact of traffic in the surrounding network. That may be right or wrong, but it's fact. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's a developing question upon that question rather than trying to go into debate. The question that I have then is that in the report that the applicant submitted that we discussed and said about public transport, there were a selling point, or there was relating to the use of the bus service to get to Bramley Station, and using the Bramley Station as a method of transport, which we also considered was not particularly sustainable. And so we read in the paper that a bus service to the town centre has been offered. So I would ask the question, or I would welcome an explanation of why just the bus service to the town centre seems to be adequate grounds for us to possibly reconsider our position. So if you could answer that one, please.
Chair, I would ask Steve Parsons in a moment just to confirm the position that's been taken on that in terms of preparing his evidence. But as I say, I think it's a combination of factors. It's no one specific point that has been raised, but certainly I'm sure Mr. Parsons can answer that point.
Yes, thank you. In terms of looking at the reason for refusal and the sustainable transport package that the original application offered, we scrutinised that. We felt that we could support the reason for refusal. It seemed to me that there were weaknesses in the sustainable measures, transport measures that were being offered at that time. Following that, we carried out our assessment of sustainable measures and sustainable transport, and we found some weaknesses in what was being offered. And the two key issues for us were the poor quality bus service that was being offered, and it seemed to have been watered down perhaps through the planning process to the point where what was being offered seemed to be a taxi minibus service, and there were shortfalls in pedestrian provision. But on the bus service, that has moved away now from the taxi minibus service. There's been further negotiations, I understand, between the appellants and Stagecoach, and what is now being offered is really along the lines of what I was suggesting needed to be offered in my proof of evidence, which was a service connecting the site to the town centre with a half-hour frequency to provide a quality service to residents. Of course, we've got an existing service that is also nearby to the site, but it was crucial to get a site that was within a 400-metre walk distance of new residents and a half-hour service. That is now being offered, and I think makes a key difference to the acceptability of this proposal when we're looking at bus services in particular.
Would you like to comment, please, on the question raised by one of the parish councils, which is the clear public perception that that's all well and good, but it only runs for 5 years, and what happens after that, and what is the planning status of such agreements? Is whether that's normal, and if so, what the rationale is?
Thank you. Yes. The appellant has looked at the viability of the service. I personally scrutinised that. I think with trying to secure a bus service, you need to look at the long-term viability. The figures they've put forward shows or gives every indication that that bus service will be a viable bus service in 5 years' time. I think you need to have a reasonable threshold. You can't. I think it would be unreasonable in the planning sense to demand that the appellant kept funding that in entirety for future years. You have to have some point where you say, we need to determine if this service is viable. I think from the evidence that has been produced, it demonstrates that the service is likely to be viable after 5 years. So whilst there can be no guarantee, from the evidence that's been produced, I believe that service will continue after that 5-year period.
So, really, excuse me. My point, though, was the fact that people living here in the Bramley parish, there's possibly an expectation. I would think that they may well wish to travel north. They might want to wish to therefore use the train service at Bramley. It will probably be a sales and marketing offer. But how do you then see that a bus service taking them in the wrong direction is going to be useful to that population? I mean, it's about providing transport facilities where people want to go, not just where the bus wants to go.
Thank you. So I think it comes back to providing a viable service, and perhaps a service that goes on to Bramley or provides a service towards the north may not be so viable. I think it seems that a key aspect is to provide a link into the town centre, allow residents to have a convenient link to Basingstoke town centre and to the rail services at Basingstoke. Yes, of course, it would be nice to have further services linking to Bramley Station and perhaps elsewhere as well. But you have to have your eye on viability and the reasonableness of such requests as well. I think we have taken that view, and we think what is being offered is viable and reasonable in a planning sense, and addresses the sustainability concerns in terms of bus provision.
Yep.
Sorry, just one last point. Well, I didn't actually also say that possibly one might consider that the people in the residents there might want to go shopping in the local shopping centre in Chinham. And again, that bus service would be potentially of no great use to them if it took them to the town. It's not, unless we know the route. We don't know the route, to be fair. But nothing like this is sort of addressing, again, the needs or perceived needs of a community in that particular location.
I think just on that point, you have got the Route 7 service, which provides a bus service to Chinham. Yes, it's a little bit further away from the site. It is still within walking distance, perhaps not the desirable walking distance that we've sought in terms of the new bus service provision, but you still have that alternative bus service that provides a link into Chinham.
Councillor Tucker, then Councillor Potts.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to show my ignorance here. In 3.2, it says that the appeal was a written recommendation to the Secretary of State from the inspector. Does that mean why does it go to the Secretary of State as opposed to just an inspector? Is there something new or something I don't understand? That's question number one.
Effectively, this is a recovered appeal, so...
I don't think you're on, are you?
No. Effectively, this is a recovered appeal, so the inspector would make a recommendation, as happened on the Marnell Park inquiry, from memory, to the Secretary of State, and they would then effectively make the final decision.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, just seeking clarification on that point as to whether it has actually formally been recovered or not. Certainly the Marnell Park appeal was, in either scenario. So if it was a recovered appeal, and I'm just clarifying that point now, if it was a recovered appeal, the inspector would make a recommendation. It would go to the Secretary of State for final decision and say, as per the Marnell Park decision. Technically, the Secretary of State can recover an appeal at any point to make the final decision. What often happens, though, is that of applications of a certain size, where they feel there's a wider sort of point of national policy, if you like, they give a pre-warning that that's what they're going to be doing in those terms.
So basically, it's probably the size that has caused it, right? Okay. Now you mentioned, or the chairman did, that the applicants are going for costs, and I was trying to understand the reasoning why, because there seems to have been negotiations going on at which there seems to be an agreement, and therefore what reason do they have to ask for costs?
Effectively, the position on costs can be made at any time. So even though the council has acted, in our view, reasonably in continuing discussions with the appellant, as we're required to do, to be proactive and positive as required by the NPPF, the appellant can still make a case, if you like, that the council acted unreasonably in the way that it refused or would have refused planning permission in the first place. So in some ways, irrespective of what happens between that decision or the resolution that the committee would have refused permission and the actual inquiry, the appellant can still make a case that it was unreasonable to come to that decision in the first place. So effectively, irrespective of the outcome of any decision tonight, that case would still be heard by the inspector at the inquiry over the next few days.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just say what I don't understand is that I had understood that there were negotiations going on before they went to appeal between Hampshire and ourselves, and everything had been going along, as we understood, quite happily. It would seem to me that it's unreasonable to have gone to appeal. I'm sorry, I'm probably going out of my remit, but that's the way I feel.
Yes, we should be careful not to get into discussion here on what the arguments for and against costs would be, because that's a separate matter and not for this committee. But an appellant can ask for costs at any time, and their grounds don't have to be strong. They can have a go and ask for costs. It may be that the matter you just mentioned could be raised in our defence against an application for costs, but that's not for this committee. That's to be determined when we see the whites of their eyes after the appeal. I mean, if the appeal is found against them, they won't get any costs, clearly. If the appeal is found for them, then they'll appeal. They are applying for costs, and that will be held as a separate discussion with the inspector, and the council will put forward its best case for refusing costs. But we're not here to discuss what that best case ought to be, and I strongly advise not to get into that, because you'll be giving ammunition to the people who may be making an appeal for costs. See what I mean? We don't want to predetermine that by our discussion here.
I've already come out of that.
Equally, the council could apply for costs, and the costs could be awarded to the council. So we're not here. We have no idea what will happen to the costs application. Councillor Potter?
I mean, taking your advice, Chairman, regarding costs, but I mean, it might just be worth putting on record that my understanding is that there's certainly no obligation, certainly no necessity for either party to make an application for costs at this juncture, and I think that is worth noting. Mine's the different matter of the noise level limits. I mean, could I just see if I could get some understanding on this? And I'm not entirely sure I understand where we are. I'm looking at paragraph 7.2 of the report in particular. I mean, if it's a given that air products noise levels are not likely to decrease, and I don't think I've seen any evidence that the source of the noise is going to change, then obviously we're talking about acceptance levels of noise on this residential development, or mitigation, one or other, or perhaps both, really, in this regard. And I know obviously the paragraph makes it very clear that in terms of mitigation or controls, that will go forward when the detailed design of the development would come forward at the reserved matters stage. But I think it's reasonable to ask, or reasonable for me to ask anyway, what type of things we're talking about, because either, it seems to me, my simple lay language, the tolerance levels by agreement are being reduced, or there are some physical ideas about how that mitigation could be achieved, you know, in simple language, again, higher barriers or the like. Now, it seems to me to get to this stage of agreement between the consultants, there must have been that type of discussion. I don't think it's in the report as such, and it's clearly said it will come forward at a later stage, but I would like some indication of where those parameters of discussion have taken us. Is that okay, Chairman?
Yes, had you not asked, I was going to ask for some explanation. I just want to be, if we could park that for a moment, David. Are there any more questions from members about the transport and traffic aspects? Because it'd be nice to sort of deal with those and then deal with, because there may be further questions arising from what's said about the noise. If there aren't, then fine. Can we now address the question? Sorry, Chris, yes.
Thanks, Chair. Well, it's just moving on, because in the reasons for refusal, we also stressed we feel there's inadequate local community facilities and local services. So we make a statement there. Are we going to contend with that point? Because we then go on to say that will encourage use of the private car, but inadequate community facilities and local services. So I don't see that anything has changed in the application to say that that isn't still the case. So are we picking up on that point ourselves or through any consultant?
Again, I'm sure Mr. Parsons will provide any detail on this, but effectively the position is that in preparing his evidence, yes, there's been some assessment of sort of local facilities in the area, but effectively the position on the improved access arrangements has overcome, in the evidence produced there, the concerns on whether whether the reliance on the car would be so significant. So the access in terms of the improved pedestrian facilities and bus services, in the evidence produced by Steve as expert witness, overcomes the concern in terms of the access to facilities. Now, as I said before, that doesn't preclude anyone else from attending the inquiry and still raising that point. The issue is that we don't have an expert witness who can support the position as put forward in the reason for refusal.
Just to be clear, that in reason 3, which is not up for debate this evening unless one wants to withdraw it, which I think is unlikely, it does refer to contributions in connection with facilities. But the actual reason 1 is about access. Due to there being inadequate local community facilities and local services, the scheme will encourage the use of the private car without giving people the choice of how they travel. So the wording of it suggests that it's a lack of access to the facilities, which they've attempted to address through the provision of the bus service. I had another question about bus service before we go on, but would you like to comment, please?
Yes, I mean, just to confirm that we've looked at local facilities and access to those local facilities and what needs to be provided to improve access to those local facilities. Again, it's looking at the guidance set out in the National Planning Policy Framework and ensuring that reasonable measures to promote sustainable travel have been taken up. And I think that's exactly what we have now done. Whether it would be less reasonable or perhaps unreasonable to suggest that a new facility should be built so that it's within a walk distance of the site. For example, a new shop. My advice to you would be that would not be a reasonable requirement to improve sustainable travel, but looking at the improvements that could be implemented to improve access to the existing facilities is, and that's what we've looked at in detail.
Anything else on the travel transport aspects? No. If we could move on to the noise. Did you capture the gist of Councillor Potter?
Yes, I think I caught the nature of the question. Effectively, mitigation is provided by a number of means. It's, as you said, it's acoustic screening, it's barriers, it's provision of glazing to properties to ensure that noise levels internally are within acceptable limits, and it's also orientation, master planning, layout of buildings. And the change that we've had since the original planning application is that the appellant has moved quite some way in terms of what they're prepared to do. At the original planning application stage, they had specified acoustic glazing, so specialist glazing to protect internal noise levels, but they hadn't provided adequate alternative means of ventilation. So the issue being that a resident could open a window and let the noise in and be disturbed by the noise. So now we have alternative means of ventilation, so that there is actually no requirement on the residents living closest to the boundary with air products anyway to open windows for ventilation purposes at any time. and that is one of the reasons, that sort of significant step change that we now have is a reason why I'm happy with the noise situation as it is now, but I wasn't at the time that the planning application was first submitted, and hence I was able to support the reason for refusal. We also have the issue of noise levels in external amenity spaces, and the appellant has moved quite some way in that regard as well. They've been prepared to accept a much lower noise limit, so noise emitted from air products will be lower now in gardens and communal amenity spaces, and that will be achieved by screening, by master planning, orientation of buildings, etc. And it'll be down to them at the reserved matters to demonstrate at reserved matters that their scheme will comply with that.
Just to be clear, in case the people who don't understand it, that the application will come back to committee at the reserved matters stage, when we'll look at the layout and how close people are to the air product site and so forth. David, again. And then Councillor Tucker, then
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, respecting the point you made there, obviously about, if you like, the sort of fine detail of that, but I just wanted to be absolutely clear, sorry, forgive me really, in regard to these sealed housing units. I mean, the recommendation will be don't open your window but put the fan on. Is that how it's going to be overcome? Is that, and at all times of year, whatever the weather, don't open your windows, put your fan on. That's what we're working towards, is it really?
Well, to be honest, it's the developer's choice. I mean, that is one possible scenario. But there is a lot they can do with master planning and design and orientation of the buildings. For example, they could, if they so wished, they could decide that the property facade furthest south, closest to that boundary with air products, could contain non-habitable rooms, for example. So it could be communal spaces, it could be hallways, it could be bathrooms. If they want to put bedrooms and lounges facing that way, then yes, that will be the way that the scheme is likely to have to be developed. But I would say, I mean, it's not these days with mechanical heat recovery and these kind of modern systems, it's not that unusual a situation, and it still provides, although it sounds dramatic and it may be a property that perhaps some of us wouldn't choose to live in, it's still a commonly provided scheme of ventilation.
Councillor Tucker, Councillor Miller and Councillor Tomlin, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that subject, I'm sure you've got some very clever ideas as to what can possibly happen if you have a fan and all the rest of it inside the house, but there are many people who like to enjoy their gardens. How are you going to mitigate that?
Well, so quite simply, we've measured the noise level on site. We've measured the background noise level on the site without any contribution of noise from air products, and we've set a noise limit that will apply in gardens and external amenity areas. We've agreed that limit with the appellant, and it's down to the appellant then to design their scheme at reserved matters to ensure that that noise limit isn't exceeded in gardens. And like I say, it's all down to, and providing that limit isn't exceeded, then the impact of noise from air products will be acceptable. And it's just down to the developer to design their scheme accordingly to comply with that limit.
Councillor Miller, then Councillor Tomlin.
Very quickly on that one. I don't know who could answer this, whether it's the officers or our learned noise consultant. What we found locally, as far as noise is concerned, and I won't mention where the noise is generated from, is that it's all very well working on numbers. And my interest is in this particular case because people move into houses that are built there. The developer has taken on a responsibility for safeguarding the site against noise generation to a certain level. We don't know what it is, so many decibels, presumably. Then would the residents who are living there and they determine that the noise is excessive, would they have a comeback on the developer who is breaching this particular guideline, which we don't know about yet? Because inside, fine, yeah, I know about triple glazing and everything else, but as Councillor Tucker says, a site is generic. It's got children outside. If it's got people moving around outside, it's the outside. I'm not particularly interested in the inside. It's the outside noise interference, if you will, or the permeation of that noise, which is the important one. And as I said, I've spent the last 5 years taking calls from people saying excessive noise outside at night in the summer when it's hot. You've got to open your windows to survive. And that's a 24-hour operation at Air Products.
Obviously, we're only focused with noise from Air Products. It's, I mean, you know, I can't emphasise the point enough. It's down to the appellant at the reserve matters stage to demonstrate that their scheme will be designed to comply with the limits that we've set. And you know, and providing that's you know that occurs, then you know we're confident that the impact will be within acceptable bounds. One point I haven't mentioned is the potential for Air Products to intensify, which could happen. But I don't know how much you know about the way that Air Products operates. They have two areas. Okay, they have two areas of operation. One is their main operation is their cylinder distribution. And actually, what we established actually is that that's far enough away from the site for really it not to be an issue. And that's the main 24-hour operation. So really, we're fairly confident that very confident that the noise created there isn't going to impact on the site in any way. The area of their operation which does have the potential to impact is the area that's closest to the boundary, which is a research and development facility, which tends to operate just during office hours, if you like. They do have experiments which run overnight and for 24 hours a day, but it also, in terms of plant and their potential to intensify, they have a very limited amount of external space in that area, and we also take so on that basis there is limited potential for them to intensify, and we also take the view that if they were to introduce new plants or new processes, many of those would need a planning application in order for them to do so. So they would need to apply for planning consent, and then the onus would be on them to provide the necessary noise mitigation to ensure that they don't disturb residents there in the future.
Chairs, just to build on what Mr. Peckham was just saying there, I mean, in terms of the technical information, absolutely correct. In terms of the approach here, if you like, it's that the condition would secure the level of noise, if you like, that we'd be working towards on the reserve matter stage. So the council would still maintain the control over what the final design would be to achieve that, and it would be at the reserve matter stage that we'd need to be satisfied that whatever design issues or mitigation points are put forward, so either the layout of the buildings themselves or physical attributes of the buildings meet that noise level. That's not to say that there won't be a noise complaint in the future from a resident who finds that potentially unacceptable, but it is saying that it's bringing it down to a level which is deemed to be acceptable against sort of adopted standards. So the control, if you like, is at the reserve matter stage where all of those details would come through. And the point that I think Mr. Peckham's got to in terms of providing his evidence is that we are now satisfied that there is a potential package of works, and we don't know exactly what they will be at this stage, that would come forward which could achieve that. But the key point and the key difference is the change in position of the appellant and accepting the evidence that Mr. Peckham's put forward in terms of the actual noise levels in the first instance.
If you don't mind me saying, actually, it's worth also just mentioning that the condition that we've agreed also requires the developer or the occupants of the development to maintain those noise mitigation measures, so be it screening or specialist glazing for the life of the development.
Understand there is a condition already. I understand from that remark. We could have been supplied with these conditions. It would have obviated maybe quite a few questions. That's why I said there's conditions maybe. Reserve matters, but they're not in the report.
No, they're not. Appreciate the comment. It may be helpful to add those in, but certainly the purpose of the condition is to maintain the council's control over the final detail. So that's effectively what the condition will secure.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, I've got small sub-questions, obviously all about the same sort of thing. Can you give us an indication of the sound level limits that you've set, or give us a brief, so we got a brief understanding, and where those standards have come from? Because you said you've set them, you've derided them. That's the first part.
I'm happy to do so. I'm slightly concerned I may lose you in technical speak, but I'll try and keep it simple. We have a standard, a British standard, which is British Standard 4142, which relates to the impact of industrial noise on residential properties, and it applies externally to the properties. And I've used that as the basis of my my evidence. The noise level that we've set is in gardens is 42 dB, and that's averaged over an hour, and that's a daytime level between 7 a.m. and 2300. And that is derived from, it's based on a determined background noise level of 42 dB as well.
Sorry, I was interested in that. What about at night?
We also have separate limits which apply internally, and we have agreed, I'm just trying to remember what they are now, we've agreed that's right, we've agreed a internal noise limit of 30 dB, which is averaged over 5 minutes internally, and another parameter which is called an LA max, which is effectively a maximum level of 45, and they fall out of the 45 L max falls out of guidance from the World Health Organization relating to sleep disturbance. The 30 dB is a compromise position between ourselves and the appellant's acoustic consultant, which relates partially to sleep disturbance, again from the World Health Organization, but also relates to the BS 4142 criteria that I referred to a minute ago.
Can you come round and about 7:30 one morning to my place and work out how to stop my wife vacuuming at 7:30 in the morning on the stairs? Would be a great help, I think.
Well, just carrying on, yes, it's a shame that we're not allowed to talk about it, but the Chinooks will blow that completely apart. But anyway, we'll move on to the sound survey that you did. Whereabouts did you sort of look? What sort of levels did you find? Because we get some noise, obviously, from air products. We get complaints, but we also have this, best described as venting, whooshing sound, which we can hear a long way away. So that must be pretty loud, as close to the site as it is.
Yes, it's extremely loud. What we discovered is one of the biggest issues with all of this has been that the noise from air products is incredibly variable, and I'm unsure of the geography in terms of where, when you refer to sort of the area that you experience noise from, but generally the venting associated with the cylinder distribution area and the associated noise with that, we generally don't find, I don't think is going to be an issue on the development site, but certainly the noise from the venting that's associated with the R&D application potentially can be. And what we discovered in the surveys that I did a survey of my own at the site boundary, which was about 10 days in duration, and the appellant's acoustic consultants have done 2. And we have between the two, we've shared the data. We have about, I think it's 28 days worth of data between the two of us. The worst case we found is that event is one event which has lasted 8 minutes. The next worst after that was 4 minutes, and then in my own survey there was some sort of, I'm not exactly sure exactly what was going on, but there was some kind of experiment, and we had a vent of the main nitrogen tank there, big bulk storage nitrogen tank, which vented for 16 seconds approximately every 90 minutes, and that went on day and night for about 3 or 4 days. So you know, the conditions that we've derived, the limits that we've derived, are independent of the noise level and the activity that we've measured directly from air products. They're based on what's reasonable, effectively based on the background noise level, independently of air products. And like I say, then it's down to the developer, the appellant, to engineer their scheme to comply with those limits.
So do I understand then that these occurrences that you said that are a bit hard to predict and are variable but very loud don't come into what you're recommending, and it's up to the appellant to sort that out? How do you think they're going to do that?
I mean, ultimately, there is a level of impact that which relates to the amount of venting and how frequently it occurs and everything else. What I'm saying is, regardless of that, there is an acceptable noise level that would apply at the new properties, which, if not exceeded, would make those properties suitable for development. So it is down to the developer, the appellant, to engineer their scheme to ensure that noise levels in gardens and internally inside the properties doesn't exceed those levels. How they choose to do that, I mean, we've described some of the measures that they could use, but how they choose to do that is down to them. And clearly the noise that the air products create is going to be the input, if you like, into the start of that engineering process. But it is, what I'm concerned about is what are acceptable limits, which if not exceeded means that the degree of impact at those properties will be acceptable.
Any further questions? Councillor Beerman, you rather missed the slot. You've been listening to us. Do you wish to address the committee? Yes, just to be clear, we are clearly addressing the paper and the question of whether or not the council continues to sustain its objections, its reasons for refusal 1 and 2. And that's the subject that we're focused on, as you probably gathered. Well, he can speak from anywhere he likes, I don't mind. You don't have to wander around, that's fine.
Thank you. I hope I can speak clearly. I have to just say in introductory remarks, so I do feel quite depressed at the way that this application has moved forward, and the fact that the issues that Councillor Tucker raised, and then subsequently this meeting with only half-baked information has to take place, so one can't really analyse things. That does worry me. One of the things that was mentioned, indeed, in the SHLA is isolation, and the report says this is being addressed by better transport links. I'm having difficulty in understanding these improvements. There's reference to providing a bus service. Now, I'm not a rich person, but I'll put a pretty big bet on the fact that that bus service will die as soon as the subsidy is removed. And one of the reasons it will die is because it will serve such a small and uncommercial area that once you take away the subsidy, our present providers will say, buzz off. I note the report says there's an expectation of a 300,000 support grant from Hampshire. Well, Hampshire are pulling away their grants left, right and centre, so I'm not quite understanding how that can in any way be guaranteed, because it jolly well can't. We can't enforce support from our partner authority, unless I'm missing something, even if it's in a condition. Then there's a reference to improvements at the Red Army roundabout. I'm sorry, I haven't seen anything in this that mitigates the problems of the multiple lane roundabout that already is very accident prone because people are confused by the road configuration, in as much as that the A road is going at a right angle when you hit the roundabout rather than straight ahead, and people get confused. So the mitigation of that to improve travel hasn't appeared. Nor has, in fact, elsewhere, there's been withdrawal of support for improving the Binfields roundabout, the Thornhill traffic lights, and I don't see any reference to how one's going to cope at Razors Farm once the road is linked up. In fact, that's going to be bedlam, because half of the traffic that's going through Chinham now will go there, and that will be absolute chaos. So I don't see how the travel issues that were raised previously have been addressed. I'd just like to then touch on this noise issue. I'm puzzled because whatever one does inside a building, most of this noise that has been an issue in the past, and certainly for Chinham, is the clanking of the bottles. And depending on the wind direction, you get areas much further than Razor's Farm away from Air Products being inconvenienced and nuisanced by the noise. Now, I can't understand, because we're talking about the appellant making 106 agreements to prevent that happening. But once they've moved away from the site, they're not going to be coming back and doing checks. And they can't control what Air Products do. Indeed, Air Products will probably, at the end of the day, be subject to environmental health complaints because of the noise they're making. But they were in a perfectly reasonable place to make that noise. We can't control we shouldn't be seeking to control their noise. We shouldn't be putting something so close that they're subject to the noise and can't escape, i.e. the potential new residents.
Could you finish off fairly quickly, Martin, please?
Yes. Well, I would like to know, I would like a specific answer, if I may, as to how, once the houses are built with all the consultants' amelioration devices built in, how then it is controlled in a way that doesn't seriously disadvantage Air Products. And I don't think there is a way of doing that. And with that, thank you very much, Chairman. I'd just say, in passing on the bus service, the corrections that were negative don't seem to appear in this report. And since the original application was submitted, it refers to a 12-minute bus service, which has now been reduced to 15 minutes. But that deterioration doesn't appear in the report. I'll just flag that up as a thought. And there's nothing for cyclists.
Yeah, we don't, by convention, have questions from visiting members. But if either of our consultants have picked up something which hasn't previously been answered from that, I'm happy to. Yep, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think just to pick up on some of the points, a number of the concerns relate to capacity and the operation of key junctions. Clearly, that as was discussed earlier, that wasn't a part of the reason for refusal. Our focus has been on sustainable transport and links to facilities. That's what we've looked at. We've looked at the weaknesses in accordance with guidance and Department for Transport's mechanisms for assessing pedestrian infrastructure and bus services. That's what we've done. That's what we've carried out. And what is now being offered in terms of funding of the bus service, and that was mentioned, the appellant is now offering £600,000 to fund that service over a 5-year period. That is I think 300,000 more than what's previously being offered. So this is a better service that has been secured and provides a link into the town centre.
We did explore earlier the question of whether the bus service continues after 5 years, and it's to do with a viability assessment, and there has been a viability assessment. But of course, nobody can predict what's going to happen in 5 years' time. We all have our own views on bus services, but that's not moot for this evening. The question that I think arose in my mind from that was the question of, there is a mention of a contribution to that by the county. I think I'm right in saying in the report. In planning terms, what is, and this might be for Mike rather than you, but in planning terms, does that mean that the county enters into an irrevocable commitment to do that as part of the process, assuming that that's what comes out of the appeal? Is presumably it's some sort of concrete agreement, is it?
It would be. So effectively, the evidence that would be provided to the inquiry would be subject to the signing of a Section 106 agreement. That would include county as a signatory to that Section 106, and effectively the county have now confirmed that they are in principle satisfied that the 106 as drafted in terms of head of terms is acceptable to them as well. So that would be part of the approach at the appeal.
Are there any further questions? Are there anyone might like to make any discussion points in that case, if there aren't any? Everyone's gone very quiet. Yeah, sure.
All right, as a discussion point, they're not questions, but observations I think I made as I went through the report. I'll endorse Councillor Bierman's comment. Sustainable transport does include cycles. You've got no, there was no mention in the discussions here because it amplifies what's in this very what I consider a scanty report about cycleways. It's being promoted all over the country as anywhere that should be built with dedicated cycleways now. If you don't build them now, you'll never get them, and you're going to mix cycles and vehicular traffic. I echo the concerns about the transport contribution from county. I happen to be on a committee that we're examining the sustainability of bus services in Basingstoke, and all they're doing is being reduced. There's no question of getting further subsidies from county. I'll be glad to hear maybe in the next couple of months if that stand will be changed. But it is a very sensitive point in Basingstoke and Dean as a borough. The other point that I picked up was to do, yes, with, I didn't bring it up as a question, but it came up in the an observation by Councillor Tomlin. I think somebody got the wrong end of the stick when they looked at reason for refusal number 1. About halfway, or about a third of the way into the paragraph, it says, there being inadequate local community facilities. I can assure you that community facilities, by the definition that we have evolved into the local plan, doesn't mean a community hall. It means community facilities, schools, dental, medical practice. Those in Chinham are inadequate. With these kind of developments, they are at maximum now. You put these developments in, they become inadequate. It's not the transportation that's inadequate, it's the facilities that are inadequate. And that's what we've been pushing time and time again in committees here. Now that's why that sentence went, that phrase went in there. You seem to be alluding to the inadequacy of the transport. It's not the transport, it's the facilities that are inadequate. And this is a matter of record. It's a matter of record all over the borough. That with the expansion...
Sorry, we're not in a position to change, modify the reasons for refusal.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Well, I'm sorry. The fact that you might think and everybody else might think that some facilities are inadequate all over the borough is not germane to this application. What we're here to discuss is these reasons for refusal.
In that case, I will limit it to my ward and to the Bramley ward. We're all concerned in the immediacy of this application at Razors Farm. The facilities surrounding it, I won't repeat myself, are inadequate. I have been doing my own investigations at the local medical centre, the dental centres. Those are community facilities. And I'm sorry if somebody sort of picked up the wrong meaning of the word, but we have defined them in terms of essential community facilities. So I still do not get a feel that that was the real reason, or the interpretation has been taken of the reason for refusal number 1. I think that's sufficient, Chair. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? David?
Just seeking your guidance again, Chair, are we making sort of contributions in debate now? Is this where we are? And
Yes, debate, yeah. But if we stick purely to the subject on the paper, if we may.
absolutely try and do that. I mean, obviously, I'm always in danger of stating the obvious, but I mean, the dilemma that we face is obvious to everybody, I know, this evening. I haven't heard much, I have to say, that really changes the view that I think we reached originally in terms of the adequacy or not appropriateness of this site, and the arguments around sustainability or unsustainability, I think, still apply. It's quite difficult, obviously, to make these arguments with one hand up behind our back, isn't it, really, because we know what the name of the game is, really. But in regard to the noise aspects and noise mitigation, I mean, I genuinely feel very uncertain about what is actually being suggested here by the two consultants working together, because, like we've said, and this is no criticism of Air Products, by the way, I mean, I feel sorry for that company, and I think they've experienced this elsewhere, where in good faith, they start up their business in one site with no absolute guarantee, but some expectation that they're going to be in this sort of isolated position where, yes, they make noise, but it's not going to be so unreasonable as to disturb many people. And then people come along and say, by the way, we want to build in the field next to you, and you know, we are now going to start to say some interesting, if not critical, things about the noise emission from your product and all that flows from that. And certainly, I mean, most of us sat around this room would not want to live in a house that was somewhere close to that production run, I have to tell you. And I don't think, even though consultants can say these are what we believe would be tolerable limits and the decibel ratings that have been quoted tonight, yeah, I mean, I'm no expert, so I find it difficult to know how that would rate on a, you know, nighttime or daytime experience for people. But there's so much uncertainty about that mitigation. And unless half of the site became open space so that these houses are moved so far away from air product that it makes it tolerable, I don't see how this is manageable. And then that comes back under the economic viability of the site itself. And we know the name of the game. This is so often put to us, really. And we know, obviously, the pressure, even under NPPF, that's going to be exerted and looked at by the inspector in regard to this appeal. As I say, I started off by saying I'm stating the obvious, I know, but I conclude by saying I don't believe that I've heard anything following the discussions between the consultants that really changes my view from what I reached originally. And I sought to do that, I hope, with a bit of integrity, you know, for good reasons about whether this was a site that should be supported or not, having regard to all of its failings and all of its difficulties. And I think I reached that conclusion tonight. And I know the implications of that, and I know people will say, you realise, you know, you're running a risk with this council and the way money might be spent in perhaps having to pay costs and damage, all of that stuff. But if we are going to have some integrity about the way we approve sites under NPPF and the like, I mean, we really do have to make the sort of observations I think a number of people are making tonight and stick with that. You know, not come hell or high water, but stick with that because we believe in what we're saying. And I think that's the way we've got to approach this.
Anybody else? Chris?
Chair. Well, yes, I certainly endorse everything David has said there. I mean, I'm so concerned, on the one hand, we're deciding, whatever we're deciding, which has an influence on whether an application will be successful or not. It's the people that are going to live there. I mean, we're coming up with, yeah, I appreciate the sound surveys, we're coming up with limits that we would like ideally for them to be subject to, if you like, or protected by, but we're also hearing that we're going to violate those, and we know that will happen, but we'll leave that to the developer to sort out. And I don't think that actually is a very good situation for people moving into properties. There are other noise sources there which will, I'm sure, make some of this even more sensitive, and it's a big additive thing, sound. And then yes, the bus service, I think we just missed that. I won't labour on, I agree there with Councillor Liverpool has certainly said, you know, the sustainability of the whole site rests upon its access, and my contribution and questions. It is a Bramley site, and it is this accessibility to Bramley that's been totally missed by bus service going in the opposite direction. So again, I haven't seen anything here that would change my position, and so yeah, I'm certainly comfortable with where I sit. Thank you.
I totally understand those views, and no doubt many people will share them. However, we aren't in a position at this stage to enunciate new reasons for refusal. It will be heard in the appeal this week and next, if it goes on to next week. The appeal will be heard based on these three reasons for refusal. The expert advice is given on the basis of the expert's view and learned counsel's view, who are specialists in the field, as to what will and will not pass inspection and appeal. And it is the case that however strongly members may feel about how we should have handled it, what reasons we should have put forward, what arguments might now be adduced, This committee's role is to determine, on behalf of the residents of the borough, as the regulatory committee, whether or not to proceed on the basis of these reasons for refusal, having been given clear guidance from the Learned Council, who isn't here, but the specialists who have been working with Learned Council, that these reasons for refusal will not now stand at appeal. That's the position we're in. Members may choose to say, well, we should go ahead and argue those reasons for refusal regardless. The situation is, if we do that, these experts will, their views and their evidence will be adduced by the appellant against the council, because their evidence says that the level and the arguments that have been, the negotiations that have taken place quite properly, say enough has been done to mitigate the downside of the application. Your view may be that not enough has been done, but the expert view is that it won't wash. Now, before we had this meeting, I did discuss with officers how we might proceed if this committee voted to continue with reasons 1 and 2. If the committee decides to continue with reasons 1 and 2, there is no basis for our officers to fight that cause at appeal, because the only specialist expertise they can call on are the people we've just heard from. And the officers are not specialists in the field, and Learned Council wouldn't call officers to give evidence against that of the consultants we've employed. If that's the case, then, and members here wish to continue with those 2 reasons for refusal, there is one option which we think might be open to us, which is that 1 or 2 members can themselves appear at the appeal on behalf of the committee and make their case at the appeal on behalf of the committee. But in doing so, the inspector will only hear, well, he may physically hear, but he will only take note of matters which are in these written reasons for refusal. So that is the situation we're in. And it's not a question of the emotive view that we were right or wrong, this shouldn't go ahead. The question is, do members of the committee wish to proceed on the basis that we don't have the evidence from experts to support us with those 2 reasons for refusal? That's the question before us. Does somebody want to move something? I mean, I almost heard you guys moving for proceeding on the basis of the first 2, which is why I've made that impassioned speech. Councillor Tucker.
I'm not moving something. I would like to ask a question. In the suggestion for the recommendation, it says in the absence of appropriate conditions, and this is the bit that worries me when we've been told about the background noise. 2. Sorry, in the recommendations on page 3 of 13. 2.1. Yeah, at the moment. Hang on. Where I'm coming from, I was a bit concerned, as I understood the expert, that there would be a background noise, and that would be a level that you go to, and that really things shouldn't go over that, but they might do. And it's if we can't control it, I mean, you need a sort of a workable condition, and I don't know what word that we can use. I'm just so concerned that there is this level that we're going to, but it's actually not going to catch some of the really big noises that come out from air products. And I wondered if there's any wording that could be used to change it.
I'm going to ask the consultant to answer that question. Is how do you word a condition? I mean, there's been a condition more or less agreed, hasn't there?
Yes, a condition has been agreed, and I must admit that's sort of almost a planning question, which I may not be. Oh, sorry, a condition has been agreed, and the actual precise mechanism and wording of the condition is almost a planning matter, which I may not be that well placed to answer. But if I could just rewind really to your concern relating to the possible, the idea that the noise limit that we've set could be exceeded. I mean, I think. It's a fair point, but what you should be aware of is that the mitigation that the developer, the appellant, will be asked to design into their scheme at reserve matters will be based upon our 28 days of noise data that's been recorded at the site. And I'd like to think that those 28 days have captured pretty much all of the variation, all the different things that can occur within air products. So I would be hopeful that that condition will protect the residents for the vast majority of occurrences that could occur at the air products site.
So I assume appropriate will cover everything that you feel it will cover.
Sorry, would you I'm just clarifying.
Sorry, the word that is being suggested that we move in the recommendation here is appropriate conditions. And you feel that appropriate would cover everything that'll be workable.
I think the condition we've put forward is sort of passes the tests of necessity and reasonable and precision, etc. And yes, workable. Yeah.
Nobody's moved. If nobody's going to make any, yes, Sven.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would like to move that we accept the recommendations as put forward in 2.1. Thank you.
Will somebody second that? Thank you. Those in favour? Seven. Those against? And that's carried. Would you like to confirm?
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation is carried on the basis of 7 in favour and 5 against.
Before we finish the meeting, I did say right at the beginning that some people had raised questions with me about the whole appeal process and how we got to where we are now, and whether it's transparent enough and whether people have been informed enough. I mean, it does appear that 1 or 2 people who may have thought they'd registered to be kept informed on the appeal have not heard anything from anybody since, and therefore we do need perhaps to have a look at that. Is it your will that we ask, I think it's probably planning and infrastructure to look at it, Paul, rather than this committee, because we're not in charge of the appeal process. It's a policy matter of how the council, not how the council handles appeal, but how we handle internal communication and communications with objectors and things like that.
In answer to your observation, Chair, I would welcome this to come to P&I and have a further discussion on it. My concerns that I've expressed recently, I haven't got a clue if I got registered. I sent a message to the planning officer. I have no idea when, where, what's the format. Will I be appearing? I don't know. I understand that I'm not alone in that position.
Some of us have experience of appeals and some of us have not had experience of appeals, and I think it seems appropriate. It might be that we ask that we might organise a workshop on appeals. The only trouble with doing that is nobody ever turns up, and the ones who complain about it later are the ones who couldn't come. So it might be something to have a brief report perhaps to P&I. Anyway, if members are generally in agreement with that, I will write to the Chairman of Planning and Infrastructure asking him to take up the matter. Councillor Potter.
Chair, could you just indulge me? I mean, in terms of where we are now, this decision having been taken by this committee, in terms of what happens at the inquiry tomorrow, presumably council for the borough council makes an opening statement, does he or her, I can't remember who it is, forgive me, and says this is our new position, and in my simple language, a minimal amount of time is spent then on the process. Is that right?
That could well be the position. It will in part depend on the inspector who chairs the meeting. The inspector may decide still to hear evidence depending on his particular position, maybe even to test whether how the issue or how the sort of reasonableness or otherwise of the conditions in section 106 have been arrived at. I think it's unlikely that the inspector would want to hear the council's evidence in this regard in relation to those 2 points, but he could still require it to be heard. In terms of the actual inquiry itself, the inquiry will still take place as has taken place with others. At the inspector's discretion, if you like, those who are registered to speak will still be able to address the inquiry in the same way, but it may be a shorter inquiry than had originally been envisaged as an 8-day inquiry, I think. But it will still take place in that way.
Only make the observation, I hope it is shorter than 8 days, otherwise, with respect, I could have spent the last 2 hours doing something else, but I hope it is shorter than 8 days.
I would expect that would be the case. It is the case in general that even those who have not formally registered with the appeals inspectorate, in general in these things, the inspector asks around when people assemble to say, are there any other people here who wish to speak? And in most cases, the inspector, and if there's more space and time than is allowed in his diary, as there might well be, is often inclined to let anybody speak who wishes to. So, for example, if the parish councils are not registered to speak, which I probably think they would be, but if they're not registered to speak at the hearing, then they can go along and ask to speak, and generally speaking, that would be generally speaking. In general, we expect most inspectors would agree to that, particularly if a note has been passed in advance. So anybody who feels strongly about this, ward members, for example, might want to go along and speak if they're not already registered. But we will arrange in some way for a better briefing to be available, or a briefing to be available about the appeals process and how to make sure you don't miss out on it. And the general view on that, and my own view on it, is as soon as an appeal is announced, you register direct with the planning inspectorate if you have an interest. And why not do so? Don't rely on any other mechanism. Just go straight to the planning site and register. You get a notice of all appeals in your councillor mails. Okay, that's the end of the meeting. I'll see you all again on Wednesday.